There comes a moment in every man's life when the fire inside dims. The same woman who once consumed his every thought now barely stirs a flicker. Her touch, once electric, now feels routine. He starts turning away, not out of anger, not because there's someone else, but because something deeper, something far more unsettling has happened. He's seen through the illusion. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher who didn't bother sugarcoating reality, figured this out before most. He warned that what we often call passion isn't some grand romantic gift. It's a trap, a biological trick designed not to make us happy, but to make sure we reproduce. No matter how poetic we try to dress it up, every love affair at its core is about the next generation. Schopenhauer called this the world as will and representation. In simple terms, what you thought was destiny was actually biology. What you called falling in love was just your DNA pulling your strings. And once nature gets what it wants, or realizes it won't get it from her, the curtain falls. The hunger fades, the fire goes out, and you're left wondering, what's wrong with me? But here's the thing. Nothing is wrong. You're not broken. You're not malfunctioning. You're waking up. Maybe you recently heard a podcast that confirmed this unsettling feeling, that men aren't these insatiable creatures society loves to portray. The myth that a man's desire is limitless? It's just that, a myth. In reality, male desire is highly selective. It burns hot in the presence of novelty, mystery, polarity. But when faced with routine, domesticity, predictability, it dies a quiet death. Modern cohabitation, the idea that two people should merge their lives completely, sharing every meal, every moment, every mundane detail, seems romantic on the surface. But Schopenhauer would have laughed. He would have said, you're taking a sacred instinct and putting it under fluorescent lights. You're dissecting a dream and expecting it to still sing. Desire simply cannot survive overexposure. This isn't an opinion. It's observable. It's science. That podcast probably mentioned the Westermark effect, a psychological phenomenon where people raised in sibling-like closeness develop a subconscious aversion to each other. Siblings don't desire each other not because they're resisting temptation, but because there is no temptation. Familiarity doesn't breed intimacy, it breeds repulsion. Now think about how this applies to long-term relationships. A man sees the same woman every day, listens to every complaint, shares every routine. The mystery dissolves, the rituals become mechanical, and deep down, something primal inside him says, this isn't what we're seeking anymore. Schopenhauer explains that what's driving this isn't personal happiness or relationship fulfillment. It's the cold, relentless will of nature, focused solely on the continuation of the species. And when that objective is no longer in play, the impulse withdraws, not out of cruelty, but because its job is done. What's left is silence. And in that silence, men often begin to question themselves. But Schopenhauer offers a kind of philosophical lifeline, a way out of the guilt, the shame, the confusion. He tells you straight up, the fading of your appetite isn't a malfunction, it's a message. The system has run its course. You are free now, if you dare to be. But here's what no one tells men. Freedom often feels like emptiness. Peace can feel a lot like apathy. Liberation from desire might look from the outside like withdrawal, but in truth, it's a higher state of awareness. Schopenhauer describes sexual desire as the most violent of cravings, a madness that seizes the mind, overpowers the will. But when that madness lifts, you don't fall apart. You see things for what they are. When the fog clears, there's a strange clarity that takes its place. The same woman you once idolized no longer appears as a goddess. She's human, familiar, finite. You may still love her, you may still respect her, but that fire that once consumed you, it's barely smoldering. That isn't indifference, it's sobriety. Schopenhauer once said, the lover imagines he is pursuing his own interest, while in truth, he is serving an interest foreign to himself, the species. That's the betrayal most men never notice. All those sleepless nights, those passionate declarations, the poetic love letters, they weren't entirely yours. You were a pawn in a game older than civilization, a participant in a biological ritual designed not for your fulfillment, but for humanity's continuity. And once that mission is either completed or deemed impossible, the ritual becomes stale. Modern relationships, with their emphasis on constant closeness and total transparency, unknowingly speed up this disillusionment. The more two people intertwine their daily lives, the more predictability replaces polarity. Shared bathrooms, synchronized schedules, endless small talk. They seem innocent, but they're eros killers. They dissolve tension, blur boundaries, and dismantle attraction's delicate architecture. The Westermark effect isn't some throwaway observation. It's a crucial clue. Children raised together in sibling-like conditions rarely feel sexual attraction to one another as adults. It's not about morality. It's deep-rooted biological programming designed to avoid stagnation and inbreeding. Now think about how long-term couples living under one roof often mimic this same sibling-like closeness. They see every version of each other, every vulnerability, every flaw, every bodily function. Over time, emotional closeness grows, but physical desire wanes. She becomes your closest companion, but not your lover. And men feel this shift deeply. Yet society has no language for this. No one explains it. So when men feel their desire fading, they're shamed, labeled lazy, immature, broken. They're told they should man up and reignite the spark. But Schopenhauer knew better. He understood that the will to life, the driving force behind our desires, doesn't care about personal happiness. It cares about propagation. And once satisfied, it leaves. Schopenhauer paraphrased that this emptiness isn't a sign of failure. It's an echo, a quiet reminder that the mission is complete. Men need to hear this. Nature is not your ally. It doesn't care about your feelings, your marriage, or your personal fulfillment. It only cares that you chase long enough to reproduce. The chase is the enchantment. The consummation is the collapse. Once the biological objective is reached or out of reach, the mask drops. What once appeared divine now seems painfully ordinary. In this light, men don't lose interest in desire. They lose interest in the illusion. What fades isn't manhood, it's delusion. What dies isn't virility. It's the fantasy that intimacy and prolonged familiarity can coexist forever. They can't. Not under the same roof. Not when routine replaces mystery. Traditional societies understood this. The podcast probably mentioned that in tribal or ancient communities, men spent most of their time with other men, working, hunting, building. Women, too, maintained their own space, raising children together. Intimacy between the sexes was preserved precisely because it was scarce. Scarcity created tension. Tension created passion. But we've lost that structure. Today, we believe closeness will fuel desire. We pursue constant access, thinking it will deepen intimacy. But the opposite happens. Access breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds indifference. And men who once believed they would always crave her find themselves quietly retreating. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You were never meant to always want her. You were supposed to awaken. Muntoichin dot van nai sangjang van YouTube script, Khong dut trent, debat quai video ngai khong. Schopenhauer wasn't just analyzing desire, he was diagnosing the human condition. And in that diagnosis, the fading of physical craving isn't a disease. It's not a flaw to be fixed. It's the beginning of sanity. What most men call love, Schopenhauer called captivity, a biological snare disguised as divine connection. And when that spell lifts, when the eyes clear and the mind sobers up, the man is left staring at a reality he never expected. He's no longer captivated. But no one prepares men for this moment. There are no rites of passage for the quiet death of craving. No cultural language for the subtle mourning that comes when longing no longer stirs. So men suffer in silence. They question themselves. They wonder if they've aged out of desire, if something's wrong with their hormones, their masculinity, their identity. But the only thing that's really missing is the lie. Schopenhauer once said, "The post-coital feeling of disgust is the true voice of nature." That line has been mocked endlessly, but it's not a joke. It's a revelation. You know that moment, that strange empty feeling right after gratification, the one you never talk about, the one that feels like a subtle spiritual nausea. That's not dysfunction. That's nature quietly stepping back. The will to life has achieved its aim, and the puppet strings go slack. And in that stillness, you realize something profound. You were never fully in control. This realization isn't romantic. It's raw. It's uncomfortable. But it's real. And for the awakened man, reality is rarely comforting. That podcast framed this transformation through the lens of overfamiliarity. When two people spend excessive time together, especially in the hyper-intimate conditions of modern cohabitation, desire naturally erodes. Not because love has died, but because mystery has. And mystery is the oxygen of attraction. Men, more than they openly admit, are aroused by distance, by contrast, by something slightly out of reach. Once a woman becomes fully known, once every mystery has been solved, every quirk explained, every surprise anticipated, the dance is over. The primal spark fizzles out. You're not being ungrateful. You're not cold-hearted. You're just reacting honestly to the loss of polarity. In traditional societies, this polarity was protected by structure. Men and women occupied distinct roles, lived parallel lives with moments of meaningful intersection. Time together was limited, and that scarcity preserved the sacredness of intimacy. Today, we obliterate those boundaries. We celebrate emotional transparency, total availability, and shared everything. And in doing so, we erode the very mystery that feeds the masculine spark. Schopenhauer, ever the blunt realist, said marriage is nature's trap, a mechanism designed to deceive the individual into acting for the species' benefit. Once the trap is sprung, once the papers are signed, the routines established, the masks dropped, desire slips quietly out the back door. Some men, sensing its absence, try to recapture it through affairs, fantasies, addictions. They chase novelty, thinking it will fix what feels broken, but nothing works for long, because the core misunderstanding remains. Your fading interest isn't a defect to be repaired. It's a signal to be understood. You see, the masculine drive isn't infinite. It's specific. It ignites in the presence of risk, of tension, of possibility just beyond reach. Once that possibility is secured, owned, domesticated, what's left to chase? The energy doesn't disappear. It simply looks for a new outlet. And this is where Schopenhauer offers an escape route. He didn't believe in numbing the senses with shallow pleasure. He wasn't advocating for mindless hedonism. He believed in transcendence, in redirecting energy away from the futile pursuit of satisfaction and toward clarity, discipline, and insight. In his view, the man who outgrows his desires isn't cursed, he's chosen. The more clearly we think, the more we shall see that the real aim of life is not enjoyment, but the negation of the will. That's Schopenhauer's ultimate rebellion. The quiet, defiant refusal to be a slave to the endless chase. The man who no longer thirsts for every new thrill isn't broken. He's maturing. He's reclaiming his agency, what nature had borrowed for its own purposes. Yet this path is lonely. Few speak of it. Society still measures masculinity by appetite, by performance, by conquest. But what if true masculinity isn't about how much a man wants, but about what he can walk away from? What if losing interest isn't a failure, but an evolution? There's a silent revolution happening in the hearts of men, a transformation so subtle, so quiet, that even those experiencing it don't always realize what's unfolding. They feel less compelled, less entangled by the fantasies that once ruled their minds. At first, they panic, then they grieve. But if they're wise, they begin to understand. They're not becoming less of a man, they're becoming more of themselves. Schopenhauer didn't write to flatter egos. He wrote to free minds. In his clearest moments, he revealed that true liberation comes not from indulgence, but from renunciation. Not from clinging to the flame, but from outgrowing the need to be burned by it. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. But when the field expands, when the veil of craving lifts, when a man sees past the illusions that once dictated his behavior, his world opens. He realizes that what he once called intimacy was often dependency, that what he once labeled as love was often addiction, that the chemistry he swore was cosmic was really just a glitch in the biological software designed to keep him tethered to nature's demands. And suddenly, in the quiet aftermath of fading desire, he finds room. Room to think, room to create, room to observe. He steps back from the game and sees it for what it is, not a sacred ritual, but a clever trick of evolution dressed up in poetry and perfume. Let's return for a moment to what that podcast described. Physical longing deteriorates in the face of prolonged familiarity. Overexposure leads to psychic saturation. Intimacy, when unmanaged, transforms into emotional claustrophobia. This was never about losing attraction overnight. It's a slow erosion, an imperceptible decay that begins when a woman becomes too known. When every layer has been peeled back, when every secret has been shared, when her being is no longer an enigma but a completed puzzle, the novelty dies, the polarity dissolves, and the man is left with companionship, but no longer combustion. Schopenhauer said, with the fading of illusion, our interest in the object fades also. Men are often described as visual creatures, but more importantly, they are psychological creatures. When the mind can no longer project mystery onto the woman, when there's no more otherness, the body loses interest too. Even the most stunningly beautiful woman will eventually be met with indifference if the psychic polarity is lost. Because the male drive isn't hunting beauty alone, it's hunting significance, difference, the echo of possibility. And modern relationships, with their emphasis on constant proximity, erode that difference at warp speed. Marriage, especially in its current form, is a desire killer. Emotional transparency, shared schedules, joint accounts, co-managed lives, it all seems practical, even noble, but it erodes the very mystery that once lit the fire. And here's the cruel irony. When men start losing interest, they're blamed, accused of being immature, emotionally unavailable, commitment phobic. But what they're really doing is responding to a truth no one dares to admit, the truth Schopenhauer so clearly saw. The will, the silent force that drives desire, isn't interested in your happiness. It commands with urgency, deceives with beauty, rewards briefly, and then retreats. And when it does, the man is left holding the shell of his former obsession, still warm, still familiar, but hollow. And here's the choice. Cling to the shell out of guilt and rot from within, or let it go. Step into the stillness. Enter the realm no one teaches men how to navigate. Peace. Muốn tôi cô đọng đoạn văn này thành kịch bản YouTube theo kiểu ngắn, mạnh, dễ quay video ngay không? Peace isn't glamorous. It doesn't make your heart race or flood your body with adrenaline. It doesn't create the fantasies of conquest that the world glorifies. It's not the stuff of love songs or epic romances. But peace, as Schopenhauer understood it, is the antidote to illusion. And it's what awaits a man who no longer mistakes his cravings for truth. From the outside, the man who stops chasing looks like he's lost something. He's not striving. He's not competing. He's not proving his desirability through conquests or numbers. Society sees this and assumes he's broken, defeated, washed up. But in reality, he's just stopped dancing for a force that never cared about his happiness to begin with. He's seen through the seduction. Schopenhauer said, a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. And there it is. You can't force yourself to want what has already been consumed. You can't reignite a fire that was never truly yours. That fire belonged to nature, to the species, to the will. Once its job is done, it moves on. And what's left isn't emptiness, it's clarity. But here's the twist. Clarity often masquerades as depression. A man who no longer feels compelled to pursue the chase gets labeled numb, disconnected, or even clinically broken. But what if that's wrong? What if he's not depressed at all? What if he's finally sober, finally free? Schopenhauer pointed to asceticism not out of disdain for life, but out of understanding. He saw the endless chase for what it was: hunger, jealousy, heartbreak, madness. And he said, enough. He offered a path that wasn't about numbing out, but about waking up, about stepping away from the fire and seeing it for what it truly is, a spectacle designed to keep you enslaved to your instincts. Men need to hear this loud and clear. Your fading desire doesn't mean you failed. It means you're waking up. You've crossed a threshold where the mirage no longer works on you. You've lived enough, seen enough, felt enough to recognize the pattern. And now you're at a crossroads. You can try to reignite a fire that only ever burned to deceive you, or you can walk into the stillness and claim your mind as your own. This is the real initiation. Not your first kiss, not your first conquest, not even your wedding day. The true initiation into manhood happens when you look at what you once worshipped and realize it no longer moves you. Not because you've become cold, but because you've evolved. You no longer need the illusion. You've outgrown the game. And if you're hearing this and it resonates, if that silence inside you feels less like emptiness and more like power, it's your responsibility to share this truth. Because there are millions of men out there suffering in confusion, blaming themselves for something that is not only natural but necessary. Speak to them. Share this video. Wake them up. Because if we don't speak up, the lie will remain unchallenged. And generations of men will keep believing they're broken for experiencing what is, in reality, a profound evolution. You're not broken. You're becoming free. And that is the beginning of everything. Now let's talk about the deeper problem with modern relationships. They're structured in a way that guarantees disillusionment. Society tells you to merge completely with your partner, emotionally, physically, logistically. Share everything, remove all boundaries, total transparency. It sounds noble, even romantic, but it's a surefire way to kill desire, because desire needs space, it needs contrast, it needs boundaries. When everything is shared, when every layer is exposed, the mystery that once ignited passion dissolves. The polarity that once created magnetic attraction fades into sameness, and men feel this shift in their bones. The more we strive for closeness, the more we accidentally breed indifference. We believe that more access will create deeper desire. But the opposite happens. Familiarity breeds emotional saturation, and men who were never taught to understand this process find themselves confused, ashamed, even resentful. But Schopenhauer understood. He saw that nature's design isn't about your personal happiness, it's about the species. Nature doesn't care if you're satisfied. It only cares that you pursue long enough to reproduce. The chase is the spell. The consummation is the collapse. Afterward, the mask falls. What once seemed divine now feels disturbingly ordinary. And this isn't a personal failure. It's a design feature. Men don't lose interest in desire itself. They lose interest in the illusion that desire can be sustained through familiarity. The truth is, intimacy and long-term cohabitation don't mix well with erotic attraction. They're fundamentally at odds. The very things that create emotional security, predictability, routine, transparency are the same things that suffocate longing. In traditional societies, these tensions were understood intuitively. Men and women occupied different spheres. Their paths intersected, but they didn't merge completely. Time apart preserved the mystery. Scarcity preserved the spark. Today we've dismantled those structures. We celebrate constant access, thinking it will fuel the flame, but it drowns it. The tragedy is, when desire fades, society tells men it's their fault. They're told to try harder, to reignite the spark, to work on the relationship. But what they're experiencing isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a reality to be understood. Schopenhauer's insight was brutal, but freeing. The will to life, this silent primal force that drives all desire, isn't personal. It's not your friend. It uses you. It seduces you with beauty and urgency, and once it gets what it wants, it withdraws, leaving you to grapple with the aftermath. And when men don't understand this, they cling. They hold on to the empty shell of their former obsession, hoping to resurrect it. But clinging only accelerates decay. Guilt makes them stay. Fear makes them perform. But inside, they rot. But there's another path, a quieter, lonelier, but ultimately freer path. The path of letting go, of stepping back from the fire and seeing it for what it is. Not a sacred ritual, but a well-designed illusion. Peace isn't as exciting as passion. It doesn't come with the highs of infatuation, but peace is honest. Peace is real. And peace is the only state in which a man can reclaim his agency. The world still tells men that their worth is measured by their hunger, by their ability to perform, to conquer, to chase. But what if true masculinity isn't about endless pursuit? What if it's about discernment, about knowing when to walk away, about having the strength to let go of what no longer serves you? When you stop needing the illusion, when you stop chasing for the sake of chasing, you're not losing your manhood. You're refining it. You're not becoming less. You're becoming precise. You're no longer a pawn in nature's game. You're a player who understands the rules and chooses when to play. Bạn có muốn mình tạo phiên bản kịch bản YouTube ngắn gọn chuẩn câu thoại dễ quay cho đoạn này luôn không? This journey, this awakening, it isn't celebrated. There are no awards for the man who stops chasing illusions, no parades, no congratulatory posts on social media. In fact, most of the world will misinterpret it. You'll be told you're losing your edge, that you've given up, that you're not the man you used to be. But that's the point. You're not the man you used to be. You're something sharper, calmer, free. Modern culture is addicted to the idea that desire is infinite, that if you don't constantly crave, pursue, and perform, something is wrong with you. But Schopenhauer, he had no interest in these shallow affirmations. He was after the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. And the truth is, the masculine drive is not an endless fountain. It's a focused force, designed for specific moments, not perpetual motion. When those moments pass or when they're overexposed, the drive naturally recedes. This is not failure, it's design. What most men don't realize is that their frustration, their quiet disappointment in long-term relationships isn't a personal flaw. It's a misalignment with reality. They've been sold a narrative that doesn't match the mechanics of desire. They're told, if you just work harder, if you communicate more, if you become a better partner, the fire will return. But the fire they're chasing isn't reignited by effort. It's maintained by polarity, by distance, by the unknown. And when everything is known, when closeness becomes suffocating, desire transforms into something else, a memory, a concept, a distant echo of what once was. And men are left confused, ashamed, and often quietly resentful. But Schopenhauer didn't offer platitudes. He offered a mirror. He made it painfully clear. The will to life uses you. It doesn't care about your fulfillment. Once it achieves its purpose, it leaves. And the man who doesn't understand this will keep trying to revive what is, by nature, designed to be temporary. That's why so many men spiral into distractions, affairs, addictions, fleeting fantasies. They think the problem is external, that changing the object of their desire will fix the internal void. But it doesn't, because the core misunderstanding remains. The void isn't a problem. It's a passage, a signpost that you're ready for a deeper chapter of life if you're willing to face it. Modern society isn't structured to help men navigate this passage. There are no guides, no mentors, only noise. Advertisements selling desire as a product. Therapists who mistake biological awakening for psychological malfunction. Friends who offer shallow advice like you need to spice things up. But Schopenhauer offers something far more valuable: permission. Permission to step off the treadmill. Permission to acknowledge that the chase was never about your joy. Permission to reclaim your focus and direct it inward, not as a retreat, but as an elevation. This path is not glamorous. It's not loud. It doesn't give you the adrenaline rush of conquest, but it gives you something far more valuable: sovereignty. A man who understands the game is no longer controlled by it. He's not bitter. He's not cynical. He simply sees clearly. He knows that intimacy and prolonged overfamiliarity are natural enemies. That emotional transparency, while noble, comes at a cost. That cost is desire. And the modern structure of relationships is designed in a way that fast-tracks this erosion. The endless sharing, the constant proximity, the merging of routines, it all accelerates the process. Not because love fades, but because polarity does. Schopenhauer's brutal honesty about marriage, that it is a biological trap, might sound harsh, but it's not a condemnation of love. It's a reminder to understand love in its real, unromantic form, as a biological strategy, not a spiritual guarantee. What men must understand is that fading desire isn't an indictment of their relationship. It's a reflection of their biology functioning exactly as designed. And once you see this, you stop blaming yourself. You stop blaming her. You stop blaming life. You start understanding the rules of the game you're in. But understanding isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because once you accept that nature isn't your friend, that it doesn't care about your personal fulfillment, you gain leverage. You can start making choices not out of compulsion, but out of clarity. That's the difference between a man enslaved by desire and a man liberated from it. Most men spend their lives in pursuit mode, chasing the next thrill, the next validation, the next conquest. They believe that this endless pursuit defines their masculinity. But Schopenhauer flips that script. True masculinity, he suggests, is defined by what you can walk away from. Desire is easy. Restraint is strength. And when you no longer need the chase, when you no longer rely on the next hit of novelty to feel alive, you step into a different kind of power. It's not loud, it doesn't flex, but it's unshakable. You begin to see the illusions for what they are. You recognize that the world's metrics of success, how much you earn, how much you own, how many you've conquered, are hollow trophies. They are measures of enslavement, not of freedom. Schopenhauer spoke of the negation of the will as the ultimate aim of life. It's a concept that sounds abstract, even grim. But in reality, it's liberating. It's the quiet rebellion against the endless chase. It's the man who, having tasted the cycle of desire and disappointment enough times, chooses to step off the wheel. He doesn't become a hermit. He doesn't reject connection, but he engages with life from a place of clarity, not compulsion. He no longer mistakes infatuation for destiny. He no longer confuses biological tricks for spiritual truths. The world will tell you this is weakness, that a man who isn't driven by desire is a man who has given up. But that's a projection from people still trapped in the loop. True freedom doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It moves silently because it's not seeking approval. When a man no longer chases what doesn't serve him, he becomes dangerous, not in a violent way, but in a way that unsettles systems built on manipulation. He becomes a man who can't be bought, distracted, or seduced by shallow promises. He becomes grounded. He becomes still. And in that stillness, he finds a version of himself that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. A version not dictated by cravings, not pulled by every new attraction, but anchored in something far deeper. Peace is not an absence of desire. It's the mastery of it. Most men think they're free because they can pursue whatever they want. But Schopenhauer would argue that true freedom is when you no longer need to pursue at all. You don't stop desiring. You outgrow the need for desire to define you. You realize that what you once called passion was, more often than not, compulsion. And compulsion, dressed in poetry and perfume, is still compulsion. Ban ko mun ming tak dot na tan kik ban YouTube chun twai, sko pause kam suk ngan, ready to quite clip? Here's the ultimate paradox Schopenhauer lays bare. The very thing you thought made you alive, desire, was also what kept you enslaved. And the moment you no longer need it, you don't lose your vitality. You reclaim it. You see, the man who stops being pulled by every flicker of craving doesn't become hollow. He becomes whole. His energy is no longer scattered, no longer wasted in pursuit of illusions designed to vanish the moment they are caught. Instead, that energy returns inward. It sharpens his focus, deepens his awareness, and for the first time, he begins to choose his actions rather than react to his impulses. But society isn't built to celebrate this kind of man. It celebrates the chasers, the restless, the forever hungry. It sells you the story that manhood is proven in how much you conquer, how much you consume, how much you desire. The man who quietly steps away from this script is invisible to that world. And yet, he's the most dangerous kind of man, because he cannot be seduced by the usual bait. Schopenhauer's message wasn't a call to bitterness. It wasn't a condemnation of women or relationships or love. It was a challenge to see things clearly, to recognize that beneath the poetry and the passion, nature has its own agenda. And when you understand that, you gain the power to stop being a pawn in its endless game. The world keeps telling men to man up when they lose desire. But it never defines what manning up actually means. Does it mean forcing yourself to want what you no longer want? Does it mean performing desire to meet society's expectations? Or does it mean having the courage to be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable? Manning up might actually mean stepping into a more evolved version of yourself, one that no longer chases illusions, but creates reality. This journey isn't for everyone. It requires confronting truths that most people spend their lives avoiding. It means walking a path where validation is scarce and external rewards are minimal. But for the men who dare to walk it, there is a reward far greater than approval: self-possession. A man who no longer needs to chase is a man who has nothing to lose, and that is the foundation of real strength. Now, this doesn't mean you'll never feel attraction again. Desire doesn't vanish. It matures. It becomes selective, intentional. You stop chasing novelty for its own sake and start appreciating connection without the compulsion to consume it. You learn to enjoy without needing to possess. But to reach that place, you have to let go of the fantasy that long-term desire can be sustained through routine proximity. You have to accept that the structures of modern relationships, as they're commonly practiced, are not designed to maintain erotic tension. They're designed for security, for companionship, for logistics. And there's nothing wrong with that, so long as you're honest about it. The tragedy is that men are shamed for experiencing a perfectly natural evolution. They're told their fading desire is a flaw, a failure, a sign of immaturity. But Schopenhauer would argue the opposite. That fading desire is a sign of awakening. You are not malfunctioning. You are maturing. You are not broken. You are beginning to see. But this vision comes with responsibility. Once you see the illusion, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer play the game as if you're unaware of its rules. And that's where the real test begins. Do you have the courage to live in truth, even if that truth is inconvenient? Do you have the discipline to redirect your energy towards pursuits that build you rather than drain you? Do you have the strength to be content without needing to constantly perform your manhood to the world? Schopenhauer offers no easy answers. He doesn't sugarcoat. He doesn't promise you happiness in the conventional sense. But what he offers is far more valuable. Freedom from the lies that keep you running in circles. Imagine a life where you no longer need to prove your worth through conquests, where your identity isn't tethered to how much you desire or how desired you are, where you can look at the illusions of the world, smile, and walk past them, not because you're numb, but because you've evolved beyond their grasp. This isn't about retreating from life. It's about engaging with life on your terms, from a place of clarity, not compulsion. Men who reach this state don't become cold or detached. In fact, they often become more capable of real connection because their interactions are no longer driven by hidden agendas or unconscious needs. They're no longer trying to fill a void. They're simply being present. The world will not understand this kind of man. But that's okay. The world wasn't designed to. The awakening Schopenhauer describes is a quiet revolution. It happens in the hearts of men who've had enough of the chase, men who've seen the pattern, felt the emptiness, and decided to seek something more enduring. This is your invitation to be one of them, to step into the stillness, to claim your mind, your energy, your life as your own. You don't have to chase to be a man. You don't have to desire endlessly to be alive. You don't have to perform to be worthy. You are free to step off the wheel. And when you do, you'll find something the world can never offer. Peace. A peace that isn't dependent on novelty. A peace that isn't shaken by proximity. A peace that comes from within, steady and unbothered. You're not broken. You're awakening. And that's where your real life begins. If these words resonate with you, don't keep them to yourself. Share them. Speak to the men in your life who are silently suffering in confusion, blaming themselves for something they were never taught to understand. Like the video. Share it. Subscribe if you want more of these uncomfortable but necessary truths. And support the channel if you believe this conversation needs to reach more men. Because if we don't speak up, the lie will continue unchallenged. You are not broken. You are becoming free. And that is the beginning of everything. Bạn có muốn mình tóm tắt đoạn này thành 5 đồng chuẩn caption YouTube Shorts cực gắt?